Well, hello, hello, my beautiful souls. How are you, ladies and gentlemen? Thank you so much for coming back, returning. We're going to be starting chapter 20. At the end, well, there was a lot that happened in the last four chapters and a lot of commentary. I hope you guys are enjoying the commentary. I'm kind of just saying what I'm hearing in my head. And sometimes when we get into those little spicy scenes, apparently my Sagittarius and Gemini side come out, and so I just laugh. So I hope you're enjoying it. Let's begin chapter 20. I think we ended where Sophia who's on the other side, has shown up for Derek, which I kind of had a feeling was going to happen. So here we go. Chapter 20. Derek stumbled to his feet, tipping his chair and backing away from the table. Sophie? The way he said her name with such devotion, mixed with fear, made my heart ache. Secrets were buried at that tone, secrets death that even death couldn't hide. Vivian heard it too. She glanced my way with the question in her eyes. Sophie was the first victim. I see. Detective, it's rare for those who have crossed over to reach out from the other side. In this circumstance, in these circumstances, it's best if we let them communicate the way they wish. If you take your seat, we can get started. You know what? I'm just thinking whoever wrote this may have some mediumship abilities because the way that she talked to somebody, she did her research because the way this is written would be something that a medium would do. That's really good. That's actually really good. I'm impressed. Speaking as a medium. Okay, back to the story. Derek's eyes Derek's Derek eyed his fallen chair as if it might bite the moment he reached for it. Ugh, let me try that again. Derek eyed his fallen chair as if it might bite the moment he reached for it. The sound of it hitting the floor had prompted Abrams to step through the beaded curtains. "Is everything all right?" he asked, taking in the scene. We stood around the table, afraid to move, as the room plunged in temperature. I shivered, recognizing the same chill that announced Ella's arrival. Except this time, I was truly scared. "It's Sophie," Derek said, picking up his chair. He lowered himself into the seat. "Impossible." Abram's skin turned gray. Candles flamed. The candle flames flickered, bouncing the shadow against the wall. The forms circled us like giant monsters waiting for their meal. Our frozen breath hung in the air, while above our heads a chandelier swayed, creaking on its rusty chain. "Sit down, Abrams," Derek instructed. His voice was tight, leashed with an intensity that made my pulse pound. Vivian lit the wick of a white pedestal candle, then reached for a bundle of sage. She burned the end until the stream of smoke and a strong odor, wafted in the air and placed the sage into a clay pot. A line of smoke curled lazily from the rim. Beside me, Derek remained seated, his body rigid. I reached for his hand, and he flinched. His resistance stung. Along the wall, the candles extinguished one by one, plunging the room into darkness. I gripped the edge of the table, hoping it would ground me in the blackout. Abrams choked out a mangled cry and pushed away. "Don't move," Vivian said, striking a match. The hint of sulphur reached my nose as she relit the candle in the center of the table. "Stop this," Abrams snapped. The sharp planes of his face glowed in the candlelight. His lips curled in a sneer. "I won't commune with spirits. It's unnatural. Sophie is dead. Let her be." "Sit," Derek ordered. Abrams bent forward, his fist balled on the tabletop. "You aren't seriously entertaining this." Derek held Abrams' horrified stare. Yes, he was entertaining it. The same man who had tried to throw me out of his office for mentioning ghosts now sat with a measure of desperation etched across his face. A stab of regret stuck like a shard in my chest. Estelle had said the case was personal to him. Seeing his reaction, I worried it was more than that. Was Sophie related to the broken line of his palm? He'd never looked so tormented. I longed for his stare to cool indifference instead of his raw insecurity. I said to sit down, do this for me or leave. A fierce look passed between them. Abrams blew out a harsh breath. They're deluding you, detective, just like the others. I won't be part of that. I'll wait outside. I still A stilted silence followed as Abrams barged through the beaded curtains. Vivian bowed her head, and I watched the beads sway back into place. What did he mean? We were like the others? Derek gave nothing away. His attention focused on Vivian. Continue, please. Of course, detective. Start by placing your hands palm down on the table. She waited until he followed her instructions, then closed her eyes. Sophie, are you here with us? Nothing happened. Sophie, please make your presence known. A rush of air snaked over my skin, the breeze unexplained in the windowless room. I can feel her, Vivian whispered. Sophie, speak to me. Tell us what you've come to here to say. A crystal vase splintered. I shrieked and shielded my eyes. Derek wrapped his arms around my shoulders, dragging me to him as tiny razors flew through the air. I looked up to find blood welling along his jaw. You're bleeding. I tried to stem the flow of with my sleeve. Derek caught my wrist, his gaze running urgently over my body while he brushed the glass from my hair. I'm fine. Are you hurt? No. Viv, are you? A void passed over Vivian's face, and her mouth went slack. She rocked in her chair before slumping against the table. Strands of dark hair pulled over her limp form. Viv! I squeezed her shoulder in an attempt to rouse her. Sweat coated her skin, dampening the neckline of her gown. Derek crouched at her side and pushed back Vivian's hair, searching for a pulse. The instant his fingers touched her neck, her hand clamped around his wrist. She lifted her head off the table and fixed us with a feverish stare. Blood streaked her cheeks with thin rivulets from a piece of glass embedded in her skin. "Oh, Viv!" I moaned. She crooked her head towards me, still latched onto Derek's arm. When I bumped the edge of the table, her chin tilted the other direction, and she studied me like a bird perched on a branch. It wasn't Vivian. Fear seized my insides. Her lips moved, speaking in a lilted voice I didn't recognize. It sent a shiver down my spine. All the petals are gone. Only the thorns remain. She faced Derek, threading her fingers through his. I shouldn't have kept secrets from you. Her voice broke in a whimper. Sophie? Derek tightened his grip. Is it really you? Sophie nodded. Tears streamed down her face, mixing with the blood the turning pink. I tried to run, couldn't. I begged, pleaded. I needed you. Her shoulders trembled, racking her body. Sobs racking her body. Derek's voice cracked with emotion. I should have been there. I'm sorry. He pulled her against him, smoothing the hair at the back of her head. Tell me what happened. I'm here now. Who did this to you? All I see are roses. Their petals stained the earth like blood. Their thorns cut to the bone. I don't understand. You're not making sense, Sophie. Please. She stared at me over Derek's shoulder. The air seemed to vanish. I couldn't breathe. Something flashed in Sophie's eyes. An understanding. Her lips curved into a soft smile. Take care of him for me. He needs you. I must have nodded because she turned back to Derek and held a slender finger on her lips. Shh. Everything is all right now. Follow the roses. Her eyes rolled into the back of her head and she swayed on her feet. Derek gripped Vivian with shaking hands. His shout of denial echoed off the wall. The candles flared, bathing the room in flashes of white light, and Vivian's body shuddered before the slowly regained consciousness. Derek helped her to the chair, steadying her until she could stay upright. "What happened?" she groaned, placing a hand over her temple. "Sophie's gone. I can't feel her anymore. Did she say anything?" With eyes closed, Derek's face contorted in pain. "I need a minute." He staggered from the room. I wanted to follow, but couldn't leave Vivian. "Go," she said. "I'm all right." I squeezed her fingers. "I'll be back." Abrams waited outside, his lanky frame leaning against the lamp post. He watched me travel down the steps, searching the near empty street for Derek. "Happy now?" he asked. "Where did he go?" "Around back, through the gate." He grabbed my arm before I could leave, fingers digging into my skin. "What did she say?" I tried to shake him off, but his grip tightened. He shouted again. "What did she say?" "Let me go! You're hurting me!" Abrams loosened his grip and I stepped back, rubbing a hand over my wrist. He clenched his fist, bringing his emotion in check. "Who is Sophie to Derek?" I asked quietly. "He didn't tell you?" "Sophie was Derek's sister." Oh, crap. Okay, back to the story. His answer stunned me. It made sense now. Derek's determination to solve the case ran deeper than preventing a murderer from striking again. His anguish at Olivia Lockhart's accusation, even his drive to keep me safe, stemmed from the same well of guilt. He hadn't been able to solve his sister's murder, and each subsequent one reopened the scar. "I didn't know. I need to talk to him. Can you sit with Vivian? She shouldn't be alone right now." Abrams nodded reluctantly. "I told you this was a bad idea." Maybe it was, but it was too late now. Seeing Sophie invade Vivian's body had affected me more than I realized. Her words from beyond the grave tore at my heart, and more than anything, I wanted to comfort Derek. I found my I found him standing in a small patch of Vivian's backyard, looking up at the silver of the moon. Sorry, looking up at the sliver of the moon. He heard me approach, but didn't turn around. "I should have told you. I'm sorry," he said. "Don't apologize. It's hard to talk about the people we've loved and even lost. Even the happy memories are torture." I sat on a stone bench. "Can you tell me about her?" Derek sighed and scrubbed a hand through his hair. "Sophie was stubborn and reckless, always getting into trouble, but it was impossible to stay mad at her. Everyone loved her. My parents doted on her, and I was her big brother, the person who was always supposed to look out for her." Solemn, I nodded my head for him to continue. "We'd been at the country house for a week, attending the king's feast and annual hunt. The whole village was excited, except for Sophie. She'd been acting strange, sullen. It wasn't like her. I was preoccupied with preparing to leave for training abroad." "Because you'd been accepted to the agency?" "That's right. The morning I was supposed to leave, Sophie barely said a word. She always told me everything. Most times I couldn't get her to stop talking. But that morning she was closed off. I teased her, thinking I could get a rise out of her, but she became furious. She stormed off, and that was the last time I saw her." "She wasn't there when you left?" "No. It wasn't until much later that I found out she'd gone missing that day. The search lasted almost a week before they found her. I wasn't informed until I returned home a month later. By then, my parents were destroyed, and her case was cold." "I'm so sorry." I rubbed my arm, the night chills settling in my bones. Derek sat beside me, drawing me against his chest to share warmth. "You're cold. I should get your coat." "No, wait." I closed my fist, then splayed my fingers over a small hearth near the bench. Magic sparked and caught fire. The flames grew brighter, snapping as they took hold of the kindling stacked in the grate. Sorry. "Some spells are easier than others," I explained with a smile, resting my head on the crook of his shoulder. We sat in silence, the fire keeping us warm. A question burned on my tongue, but I was afraid of the answer. "Can I ask you something?" He nodded. "What did Abrams mean when he said we were like the others?" It took him so long to answer, I started to think he wouldn't. After Sophie's murder, my parents were desperate. There were no leads, no suspects. One day, a witch traveled through the village, and she heard about the murder. She offered to help for a price. I begged them not to go, but they were willing to try anything. For the first time in months, they had hope. The witch promised to cast a spell that would lead them to the killer. It sounded too good to be true. And it was. My parents paid her a fortune in advance, and when they arrived the next day, the witch was gone. Oh, Derek, I didn't know what to say. I hung my head, tears streaming down my face. It was a miracle he'd opened up and let me near the case after what his family had experienced at the hands of a so-called witch. Their hopes had been shattered by a true charlatan. I know that makes it so much, it just makes it bad for everyone when people do this. That's my own commentary. Was it any wonder he'd accuse me of being one when we first met? Tessa, he tucked strands of hairs behind my ear and tilted my chin up to his. You're not like that. It took me a while to realize it because I didn't want to go through it again. But in true Tessa form, you battered my defenses. I hiccuped and swiped at my eye. That doesn't sound like a compliment. It's the it's the highest compliment. I'm sorry I gave you such a hard time. I had no idea. Wrapping his arms around me again, Derek pressed a kiss to the top of my forehead. Sorry, to the top of my head. How could you? My sister's murder made me realize how important it was for me to excel at the agency. I became a detective so I could solve her case and keep murders off the street. But it doesn't make the helplessness go away. The feeling I'm always a step behind, that I can't protect the ones I love. That's always in the back of my mind. My palm cupped the side of his face. I turned to look into his eyes, hoping to convey the truth in my words. You're a good detective, Derek Chambers. You think so? His voice was so low, rumbling in my ear. I do, and that's my highest compliment. He smiled, and the tenderness in his eyes made me feel like I was falling off a steep cliff. I realized all the traits I'd found so unappealing were simply his way of doing the best he could for those around him. Finally, she gets it. That he held himself to an impossible standard, and I wanted nothing more than to see him succeed. We need to go back to the beginning. What Sophie said about the roses, I think that's the key. Derek nodded. I agree, but no one we've questioned has been able to determine the source. Then we haven't been asking the right people. We need to go wider with information. Someone has to know something. The agency doesn't have the manpower to go door to door asking about roses. Besides, not everyone likes to be questioned by authorities. Some people get defensive when asked simple questions. I smirked. If you're alluding to me, then I know what you mean. But I have an idea. What if we could appeal to a wider audience all at once and frame the question without giving away our intention? What do you have in mind? We place an ad at the Gazette. Forget trying to find the one person with the answers about the rose. Let's have that person come to us. Chapter 21. John Lincoln stretched his legs in front of him and leaned back in his chair. It creaked under his weight, threatening to buckle beneath him. Let me get this straight. The agency wants to place an ad in my paper to track down the origin of the rose left at the crime scene. That's right, I said. Someone out there might have information or know someone who does. The Gazette is the fastest, most direct way to find them. The rose may be the killer's only mistake. It ties him to the murder in a specific way. If we can learn more about it and why it was left at the scene, we'll be a step closer to catching him. John crossed his arms. Aren't you taking a risk the killer will see the ad as well? Derek nodded. It's possible. That's why we want to run another article on the front page. Something that will distract attention. The write-up should be critical of the agency and insinuate the killer has the upper hand. He wants attention, so we'll give it to him and let him bask in it while we work different angles. Ah, bait and switch. John grinned and rubbed a hand over the whiskers of his chin. I like it. In addition, the exclusive will sell a ton of papers. We thought you'd appreciate that. I placed the glass of slippers along with the note in front of John. This was left on my doorstep following the memorial dinner. He whistled and reached out for the piece of paper. His brow lifted as he read the killer's warning. If the slipper fits, what a cocky bastard. I assumed this was taken from the scene. He examined the shoe, turning it over in his hands. Look, looks damn uncomfortable, if you ask me. Beauty is pain, Mr. Lincoln. Hasn't anyone ever told you that? He grimaced and slapped a hand over his paunchy stomach. I'll take your word for it, Miss Daniels. Derek landed Derek handed John a pre-written ad. This is what we'd like placed near the back of the paper. Inquiry should be forwarded to my office. In the meantime, we'll be running damage control on the evidence leak. It's going to be a circus. John shook his head in pity. We hope so. A circus draws a crowd. But once we have them packed into the seats, we control what they see and hear. Even at the expense of your good name, Detective? Tension tightened Derek's jaw. My name isn't any good if I don't catch Miss Lockwood's killer. After leaning After learning what the case meant to Derek, I couldn't imagine anything he wouldn't try, even if it subjected him to ridicule. He seemed to welcome it, free of the shackles of what people expected and driven only by results. John tapped his finger on the desk and eyed the glass slipper. An odd look flashed in his eyes. You know, there are rumors Miss Lockwood might not be the only victim. Care to address that, Detective? The agency doesn't comment on rumors, John. I guess that means you won't confirm the rumors swirling around the two of you. A witch and a detective is an unlikely partnership, especially considering Miss Daniels' background. He flipped through the notebook on his desk. I hope you don't mind, but my reporters have done some digging. I clenched the handrails of the chair. Had they discovered my connection to Argus? I'd underestimated what working with the newspaper would mean. My life had become fair game and fodder for the gossip section. I can't imagine what you've found, Mr. Lincoln. My past hasn't been that interesting. John laughed and read from the notebook. Not according to your sources. They make your life sound very interesting. A comedy of errors, in fact. It's amazing the people who come out of the woodwork, hoping to cash in on someone's reputation. And yours, Miss Daniels? He winced. A puzzling sound in my ears. Derek spoke, his lips moving, but I couldn't make out the words. Take the barn fire on Stratford Road about 7 years back. The owners claim you were channeling energy for a prosperous harvest, and you lit a haystack on fire. Luckily, your mother was there to supervise, or they would have lost everything. She paid them not to press charges. I shifted uncomfortably in my seat. That was an accident. Maybe so, but what about the time you turned a young man into a mouse when he made an advance on you? We have a source willing to come forward. He alleges it took you 3 days to change him back. His family put up missing posters. How much did it take to keep them quiet? Heat crawled up my neck. It had taken quite a bit. I sold a large sum of my mother's books that day, and speculation had followed me for months. John flipped the page in the notebook. There are numerous complaints of spells gone wrong. He pushed his glasses up his nose and squinted at the page. Do you know a Mrs. Anderson? She claims a couple of weeks ago you turned her hair green, then refused to refund her money. That's not what happened. The notebook snapped closed and John raised his hand. Miss Daniels, you're welcome to share your side of the story. It will round out the article. I already have an idea for a headline. He arched his hand through the air. I'm thinking disgraced witch embraces family name and endangers society. What do you think? My whole body went rigid. A sly smile played around John's lips. It was obvious what he was really after leverage. Apparently, certain men in my life thought they could use me for their own purposes. First Argus, and now John Lincoln. I burned with humiliation and a profound helplessness. Derek remained quiet, letting the scene play out. I wasn't sure if his silence made me feel better or worse. Either way, I couldn't look at him. My mediocre magic wasn't a secret, but when you put all my destruction together, it painted a vivid picture. Worthless witch. What do you want? I asked through the gritted teeth. John rubbed his hands together and snickered. I'll run your ad and the article on the slippers for the front page. It's a great idea. But you have to understand, I'm in a tough position. I can't sit on a story like this. I'll need something bigger to replace it. His gaze narrowed. Confirm whether you're looking at multiple victims, and I'll bury every last salacious account of your shameful past. I shot out of my I shot out of my chair. No, what? Fine, Derek. Fine. Derek stood and grasped my arm, squeezing gently to keep me quiet. I'll have a statement sent over. Run the story, and I'll keep Miss Daniels' personal life out of your papers. Run the story and keep Miss Daniels' personal life out of your papers, or you'll deal with me. John inclined his head. Victory stamped across his face. Pleasure doing business with you, detective. Derek slammed the office door on John's words. It barely made a sound over the commotion in the newsroom, but we walked quickly through the maze of desks out into the street. Outside, I shook off Derek's arm and kept moving, my steps stilted and angry. How dare he jeopardize the case for something so stupid? It was my fault we were even in this situation. If only I'd been better, different. How many times would I go through this before I learned my lesson? Yeah, Tessa, learn your lesson. Jeez. Okay, back to the story. Tessa, wait. He chased after me, weaving through the thick crowd. Hot tears gathered under my eyes as shame prickled my skin. A carriage clattered across the street, and I plunged ahead, missing the wheels by inches and making Derek wait for it to pass. I thought I'd lost him until his hand clamped over my shoulder. Frustration surged through my body, and I whirled. Are you crazy? You shouldn't have done that. Do you have a death wish? That carriage almost hit you. His chest rose on an angry breath. He dragged me off the street and down the side lane, where we wouldn't be overheard. Shaking him loose again, I tried to barrel past, but he blocked my attempt. My throat was tight. It hurt to speak. Let me go. Not a chance. I inhaled roughly through my nose, trying to rein in my emotions. It didn't work. What is wrong with you? You should have let him print those stories about my past. It doesn't matter what people think about me. They already have a low opinion. Seeing it in print isn't going to change anything. He reached for me, but I stepped back, certain if he touched me, I'd burst into tears. Tessa, I swore I wouldn't let anything happen to you, and that includes letting John Lincoln run a smear campaign in your name. I threw up my hands and laughed, the harsh sound echoing through the narrow alley. Well, your misplaced protectiveness gave away valuable information. It was my shortcomings that jeopardized this case. You shouldn't have agreed to his ultimatum. I'm not worth it. I never have been. Aw, Tessa. Okay, back to it. A look passed over Derek's face, disbelief morphing into resolve. This time, when he reached for me, he wasn't taking no for an answer. His palm cupped the back of my head. He hauled me to him, crushing me against his chest. He was warm and solid, and I felt myself crumbling, all of my defenses laid to waste. The rough timbre of his voice sounded in my ear. Don't ever say that. You are worth it. I would have given up a lot more if I had to. And even if there was nothing I could do, if they printed those stories, it wouldn't matter to me. Your past doesn't define you. You are so much more than just your spells. His words reshaped something inside me. They were hard to believe after years of self-doubt, but I wanted to. I wanted to believe them so much it was terrifying me to my core. I wiped the tears from my cheek and took a shuddering breath, my voice watery when I spoke. I'm sorry I got angry. I couldn't handle it if I ruined the case for you. Not after Sophie and everything your family's been through. He tightened his hold and rested his chin on top of my head. We've gotten this far because of you. You didn't ruin anything. Admitting there are multiple victims won't jeopardize the case. It might even provide new leads. Using the paper was smart. We just need to stay focused and let your plan work. I hate waiting, I grumbled into his shirt. Yeah, I know. Patience, Tessa. He rubbed the tension from the back of my neck. We stood there for a few moments, letting the stress from the last hour pass. My humiliation had simmered down to a manageable level, but mostly I felt cared for and instilled with a new sense of hope. More than my spells, no one had ever made the distinction. Noise from the street leaked into our solitude. Derek sighed and brushed the hair away from my face. I think we need a break. It's been a rough couple of days. Don't you agree? We've seen ghosts and dealt with Weasley newspapermen and threatening slippers. I went swimming in the palace fountain. Don't remind me. I think you mean you nearly drowned in the palace fountain. That's not what happened. I swatted his shoulder, but he caught my hand and pressed his lips against my fingers. Let me take you to lunch. I gasped in mocking horror. Are you seriously suggesting a leisure activity? Are you ill? My palm covered his forehead. Maybe you're hearing voices? Neither, so forget about carting me off to the asylum, he winked. I just happen to enjoy a nice meal of rosemary chicken and glazed potatoes now and then. Hey, I nudged his shoulder. How did you know that's my favorite meal? Derek shrugged. Your neighbor told me. Sylvia Traeger stopped by my office after she saw the article about us. She said it didn't matter what I was she said it didn't matter that I was looking sorry. She said it didn't matter that I was good looking, well off, or had prestigious title. She'd whack me with her cane if I treated you poorly. Goodness, I couldn't get that sentence out. Leave it to Sylvia to get her point across. I stifled a smile. Ah, everything makes sense now. You're scared of a little old lady. Yeah, and you're scared of her cat, so I guess we're even. That's fair, I chuckled as he took my hand and walked us back out into the street. We settled inside the cozy confines of the Spice and Crown restaurant. Oh, I like the name of that, Spice and Crown. Each placing an order for their roast chicken, I inhaled the delectable scents that wafted out of the kitchen and took a sip of my wine. It was a strange feeling to be seated across the table from Derek, the same man who not long ago I'd considered cursing. In fact, I was pretty sure I'd placed a curse on the woman who would end up falling for such an org. Irony certainly knew where I lived. All around us, other diners whispered. A few even pointed in our direction. Under normal circumstances, I would have ducked under the tablecloth, but not anymore. Take a good look, ladies. This witch is trying to do things differently. I love that. Derek dipped a slice of crusty bread in a dish of seasoned oil and took a bite. Chewing thoughtfully, he sipped his wine, then narrowed his eyes. So, tell me, which of your suitors did you turn into a mouse? Was it Trevor, the baker's son, or that guy, the blacksmith apprentice? So much for not wanting to climb under the tablecloth. Neither. He frowned and thumped a finger against his wine glass. If not them, who? Don't make me open up an investigation. That doesn't sound like a good use of agency resources, detective. He cleared his throat, and I huffed a breath at his stubborn look. Why do you even want to know? It's one less rival I have to worry about. My cheeks were on fire. Don't joke like that. People will hear you. Tessa, if you really want to talk about rivals, look around. You can't move left or right without. If you really want to talk about rivals, look around. You can't move left or right without some overeager debutante fawning at your feet. He didn't take his eyes off me, even though I was right. Was he blind? If he threw a breadstick, a suitable candidate would probably catch it in her teeth like a devoted puppy. I groaned internally and forced myself to relax my grip on the wineglass before it shattered. The corners of his mouth lifted, a smile almost wistful. You never fought at my feet. Disappointed? Not as much as I thought I'd be. You're. I held up a hand. Wait, I know this one. I'm different. Abrams told me. Another one of your charming compliments. I'm storing it away, along with fine, so I can swoon later. His laughter resonated through the room and at nearby tables. Forks clattered against dinnerware. What? Had no one ever heard the man laugh before? Our food arrived. The heavenly scent made my eyes close in bliss. A comfortable silence followed while we dug in, and I tried to think of something to talk about that didn't involve murder or magic. Fiddling with the corner of my napkin, I began uneasily. Tell me about your parents. What are they like? Overbearing? Derek chuckled and sliced a knife through his chicken. My father ran a shipbuilding company until he retired, and now he and my mother live in the country, driving my grandfather Edward crazy by keeping him in line. He's a loose cannon and always stirring up trouble. You two are similar. You'll like him. I choked on a mouthful of wine. Meet his family? They'd run in the opposite direction the moment he introduced a witch. I let his statement pass, feigning interest in the potatoes. After sparing one, after spearing one with my fork, I looked up and met the stare of a burly man seated at a table in the corner, chewing on a hunk of beef. Another bite. Chew, chew, stare. It was one of Argus's thugs. Derek followed my gaze. Do you know that man? He asked. Denial sat on my tongue, but I hesitated. Vivian had said I needed to trust Derek and tell him everything. After his reaction to my past failures, maybe she was right. Maybe it was time. Actually, I have something to tell you. I shouldn't have kept this from you, but I didn't know how. There was a commotion at the entrance, and Abrams approached our table. There you are! He was out of breath, his chest heaving as if he'd run a distance. Derek cast me a sympathetic look. One moment, Tessa. He turned his attention to Abrams. What's happened? You're needed at the palace, detective. He paused to catch his breath. They found another body. Oh, crap. Chapter 22. Buzzards circled overhead, their wings black smudges in the cloudy sky. In the distance, an orchard dotted the landscape, and the palace spires rose above the trees. I waded through the tall grass towards a group of officers who stood around the perimeter of the scene. The air was crisp, with a hint of wood smoke and decaying leaves. "Who found the body?" Derek said. Derek asked. "A couple of servants working in the orchard." Abrams pointed to the three young men waiting with one of the guards. Their faces were drawn and pale, and one held his stomach as if he might lose its contents if he put his arms down. Sorry. "Cause of death?" "It appears to be stab wounds in the chest. No visible murder weapon." "Has anyone made an identification?" Abrams consulted his notes. "Yes, the servants recognized him. His name is Liam Barber, also a palace servant." Liam Barber? I froze, remembering the young man's face when he confronted me outside the agency. His fear had been palpable, and he'd risked coming forward with information that had raised suspicions about the prince. Oh no, Liam, that's Liam. Guilt crushed through me. Someone had silenced him. Yeah, I wonder why. Derek caught my eye and gave a subtle shake of his head, signaling me to stay quiet. Yeah, really, because she would talk. Are you are there any other witnesses? He asked. Yes, detective. Abrams lowered his voice. Some kitchen staff saw Liam having a confrontation with Prince Marcus yesterday evening. The king has been informed, and as a precaution, he's placed his son under guard. Oh, wow. He wants to speak with you as soon as you're finished here. I understand. Clear the scene and gather the witnesses at the palace. I'll question them there. Also, arrange for the body to be transferred once we finish examining the area. Abrams hesitated at Derek's orders. I can stay and collect evidence. That's not necessary. I have Miss Daniels for that. Abrams clenched his jaw and shot me a dark look. Somebody's a little jealous. I remembered our first encounter and the way he'd idolized Derek. He'd wanted to follow in his footsteps, but I'd charged in the middle, sidelining him in a way he probably hadn't expected. Our interactions had always been friendly, but now I felt the first indication of his contempt. Part of me wanted to say something to ease the tension, but I remembered the way he'd gripped my arm outside of Vivian's, his anger rising so fast. Maybe it was best if I waited until he left to speak with Derek. His lips curled in a sardonic smile. As you wish, detective. He motioned for the guards to follow him and went to speak with the witnesses. I was the only one who noticed his stilted step and rigid back. You shouldn't dismiss him like that. He only wants to help. His outburst at Vivian's was meant to protect you from the big bad witch and her ghost hunting friends. You shouldn't punish him for that. Derek sighed. I know, but we need to tighten the flow of information. There are only a few people who know Liam approached you. He may have been followed that day. There's already been a threat. There's already been a threat against you. Not to mention the fountain incident with the prince. You said he might have been holding you under. I don't know that for sure. He helped me get out. Don't forget that. Doesn't matter. After this, there will be questions. And once the news is released about the additional victims, people will be scared. The fact that the king placed his son under guard means the focus of the investigation will change. It will be up to us to either clear his name or condemn it. It's about to get ugly. Derek motioned towards the scene. Are you ready for this? You can stay here while I examine the body. I swallowed my nerves and exhaled a shaky breath. No, Liam came to me. I owe it to him to do everything I can to bring his killer to justice. All right, here. He handed me his notebook. You can take notes. If you need a moment, let me know, and we'll stop. Quit worrying. I'm fine. Now get to work. The agency doesn't pay you to hover around me. Very funny. Derek stepped into the clearing, noting the trampled grass. Looks like the killer dragged the body through here. There are wheel tracks in the mud. He will likely move to this he was likely moved to this location in a cart. We'll need to see if we can track it down. Liam wasn't murdered here. There's not enough blood. I stayed in Derek's footsteps, careful not to disturb the scene. Abram said they didn't find a murder weapon, but it could have been tossed anywhere in this field. The grass is high enough we wouldn't be able to see it. Good point. We'll have to set up a grid search. Make note of that. There wasn't a rose this time either. This was a different sort of killing, reactionary, not part of the original plan. The roses are personal. He selects those victims for a reason. Derek bent over his body. No defensive wounds. There doesn't seem to have been a violent struggle. Making a note, I studied Liam's lifeless form. My knees felt watery, but I held my ground. Blood saturated his shirt near the wound, and seeped into the grass. He lay on his back, limbs covered partially in leaves. And as acid rose in my throat, I closed my eyes, unable to stare at his lifeless face. Air passed heavily through my lungs in short gasps. Tessa, are you okay? Derek touched my shoulder. His hand moved up to massage my neck. I know it's a lot. Maybe we should. I forced my eyes open and blinked away the dark spots. Maybe there aren't any defense wounds because he was drugged. Or maybe it was because he knew the killer. If it was someone he trusted, it's possible he didn't see it coming. Close range. One thrust in the chest, and it was over. Derek studied me, res- respect gleaming in his eyes. That makes sense. You're good at this. I've seen some of the hardiest officers keel over in the dirt for less. His praise calmed the rest of my nerves. Estelle might have been right. Maybe I'd finally found something I was good at. Between ghosts, dead bodies, and threatening gifts, I'd certainly developed nerves of steel. I have an idea. I dug into the leather satchel at my waist. I brought supplies. A kit, actually. After we used the potion to determine Ella's poison, I thought about how I could apply that sort of thing to other instances. Derek narrowed his eyes. Are you carrying around Rosenfin? You said it was a deadly substance. Relax, detective. I don't plan on eating it, but maybe we can use it to test Liam's blood. If it was poison, it might show up in the bloodstream. Think of the potential. I'm sure, given time, I can develop other potions that can do even more. Magic can become a new investigative tactic. What do you think? I think we should try it, but not in the field. I'll have Liam's shirt preserved as evidence. You can perform your test back at the agency in a controlled environment, where a rogue gust of wind won't make your deadly powder airborne. I chewed the corner of my lips. I see your point. I should pre-mix next time. I made a note in the journal. Don't write that down. That's not what I meant. Too late. Do you need my help with anything else? I should head to the agency with a sample and perform the test. The sooner we determine if poison was involved, the better. We need to get ahead of this. Derek frowned. He looked a little hurt. You're not going to question the witness with me? I'm sure you can handle it. Besides, you have to speak with the king afterwards. Let's meet later. We'll compare notes. I packed away my kit, my mind already racing towards my next task. Yeah, she might be really good at this. Sounds like it. The image of Liam's lifeless body wouldn't leave my mind, no matter how hard I tried to push it away. The drive to prove myself useful had become an essential need. In light of his murder, I couldn't sit through hours of idle questioning when the skills were better suited for running tests. Moving light over the square of fabric from his shirt, that I'd placed over the evidence table. I mixed the rosenfin powder with other ingredients, then cast the spell. The liquid congealed, signaling it was ready to apply. With light strokes, I spread the substance over the stain. The metallic scent of blood filled my nostrils along with the earthy smell wafting from the mixture. Yuck. That doesn't sound like it smells good. Stomach churning, I placed a lavender-infused rag beneath my nose. I knew I wasn't directly responsible for Liam's death, but it was hard to forget my involvement. Was this the sort of guilt Derek lived with on a daily basis? The way he controlled his emotions and buried his feelings in order to do his job was admirable. It was one of the things I loved about him, the way he put other people first, protecting them in any way he could, even at the risk to himself. He could have continued to ignore me when the prince allowed me on the case, and given his history with frauds claiming to be witches, he had every reason to. I might still be sitting in some parlor detailing a guest's every movement at the ball, but instead he'd opened up, listened to my ideas, and even let me take the lead. Derek worried about me too. Usually people were worried I'd screw up a spell or bring shame to the family name, which, let's be honest, I often did, but they weren't truly worried about me, only what I'd do next. Derek wanted what was best for me, and I wanted the same for him. He'd faced trauma and lived with the effects every day. He needed someone who could lighten his mood and provide him comfort. And if ever there was a witch for the job, now she's getting the idea. Right, ladies? My hand stilled over the vial of Rosenfin, cork stopper suspended in the air. Did I love him? No, I loved things about him. That was different. Derek and I were polar opposites. When the case was settled, we'd go our separate ways. I slumped in the chair, returning to the magic shop to sell hair cream and wrinkle tonics. Let me read that again. I slumped in the chair. Returning to the magic shop to sell hair cream and wrinkle tonics made me want to throw up. It wasn't enough. Somewhere along the way, I'd begun to hate the witch who ran the failing shop with no prospects and no plan, who went from one disaster to the next just to stay afloat. That was the girl my mother had shaken her head at in disappointment. This case had changed everything and given me a new sense of purpose. Derek was proud of my contributions. I had a place here. I'd found something and someone who mattered to me, and I didn't want to let either of them go. With a groan, I glanced at the blood-stained fabric, hoping it had changed colors and could distract me from the revealing thoughts. No such luck, which meant I needed something else to distract me instead. Good thing I was in the room full of evidence. If Derek was right, our investigation had turned toward the prince. We need to find the connection between him and all three of the women. Ella's connection was obvious. They'd attended the same ball. He even had a motive. The night the night by the fountain, he'd admitted his anger over being forced into marriage and the loss of control over his life. Would he kill to regain control? It was possible. Sophie also had a connection with the prince. She'd been murdered during one of the king's feasts. The prince would have been in attendance. It's possible their paths had crossed. There wasn't an obvious motive, but it was a start. Jane was the only one who didn't fit. Working as a barmaid, it was unlikely she visited the castle, and also unlikely that Prince Marcus had ever visited her establishment. Talk about polar opposites. It meant one of two things. Either it wasn't the prince at all, or we hadn't found the right link. I scooted the chair closer to Derek's work table and dug out a box of items taken from Jane's crime scene. There wasn't much: an embroidered coin purse, two hair ribbons, a simple metal chain, and a worn, well read book of poetry. The tokens of her life were the only witness to her crime, but they remained unforgiving in their silence. I thought about the contents in my own pockets and morbidly wondered what would be in them when I died. What story would they tell? Staring with the book of poetry, I went through it, page by page. The ink was smudged in various places, but there were no notations or clues written inside. I moved on to the coin purse, smiling I picked it up. When I picked up because it resembled one Vivian had given me when we were kids. It was the same shape and had the same embroidered pattern. Vivian had found mine on a market stall and thought of me instantly. I'd been trying to sneak spells out of the house, and my mother had started to search my pockets. The coin purse was perfect because it had hidden compartments. I opened the purse and found it empty. But sure enough, there was a near invisible sleeve on the side. Sliding my finger into the pocket, I located a slip of paper. It contained only a handwritten number and a stamped seal. A chill settled in my stomach. The seal was familiar. I'd stared at it 100 times, cursing my luck. How was this possible? I glanced at the fabric from Liam's shirt and saw the bloodstain had changed colors. Green. Liam had ingested belladonna root, same as Ella. The slip of paper trembled in my hand. Argus was searching for Iron Hazel, and now I had evidence from one of our victims containing his seal. Jane had owned Argus. Jane had owed Argus money. I needed to know why. Uh-oh. Chapter 23. Are you insane? Vivian hissed, trailing me down to the steps of her shop. She grabbed the sleeve of my cloak and didn't let go. You're going to visit Argus? I need answers, Viv. And he has them. He knows Jane and happens to be looking for Iron Hazel. That's not a coincidence? What if he's the key to unlocking this case? She twisted a block She twisted to block my path while still holding onto my sleeve. Then take Derek with you. You can't turn off it to interrogate a criminal by yourself. I forbid it. Derek has been tied up at the palace all afternoon. This is too important. It can't wait. Vivian scoffed. Oh, you're such a coward. You haven't told Derek the truth about your debt, and you're afraid of how he'll react. So, instead, you're doing what you always do, which is trying to solve everything by yourself. Do you think Derek will be impressed if you come back with information? He will be furious. She had a point. Derek's rules were clear. No investigating alone. I couldn't deny his protective streak when it came to my safety. He would be furious. Look, you're right. I haven't told Derek about Argus, and he deserves to know. But that's irrelevant to the situation because here's the truth. There is no way Argus is going to answer questions of in front of a royal detective. My only chance is to talk to him one on one, and even that is a long shot. Vivian blew out a breath and looked up at the overcast. It's such a bad idea. No, a bad idea would be to let this opportunity slip through my fingers. Derek, Derek will never let me speak with Argus once I tell him about the death, and Argus will never speak with Derek. I have one shot. Think about Ella. What wouldn't you do for one of your ghosts? You're always charging around, going to abandoned haunted houses. Remember the time you fell through the rotten floor into the basement? And it took us 2 days to find you. She shuddered. Something was living down there. I landed in its nest, and that's why I'm coming with you to see Argus. I opened my mouth to protest, but she held up a finger. Not a peep. I'm coming with you. If he recruits us into his gang and ships us off to foreign kingdoms to become hardened female assassins, then at least you won't be alone. I swallowed a laugh. Honestly, Viv, you have a colorful imagination. She shrugged. I think I'd make an excellent female assassin. Yeah. I wonder if that's a medium thing. Uh, I have feminine wiles. My aim is decent, and I happen to think I'd look good in the outfit. All good points, except there's one problem. What's that? You'll be haunted by all your kills. Sorry, you'll be haunted by all your kills. She wrinkled her nose. That is a problem. The life of an outlaw is tricky. Argus will have to assign me something else. Clenching my teeth, I pulled her along the street. He's not assigning us anything. We're just going to talk. Sounds like something his last female assassin said before he shipped her off. I groaned. Vivian adjusted her arm through mine. So we were walking side by side, two ladies on a stroll to visit a gangster. Oh my gosh. That girl gets into some mess. Oh. So, how do we find him? Does he have a den of iniquity? Or do we commit a crime and he pops up in a puff of smoke like a crooked genie? I slanted I slanted her a look out of the corner of my eye. Very funny. Actually, I thought we'd ask him. We'd ask them. I pointed across the street at the two thugs leaning against the brick building. They follow me around enough. They might as well be useful. The taller one of the two ruffians straightened when he caught me looking and nudged his partner. I waved, wiggling my fingers. His partner waved back, which earned him an elbow to his rib. Okay, Vivian muttered under her breath. I guess we walk up to street hooligans now and ask for directions? Thug number one crossed his arms over his burly chest. His tree trunk legs were spreading apart. I'm sorry, his tree trunk legs were spread apart, and he looked like a mountain of muscle encased in a pair of leather boots. You lost? He growled. You could say that. I wiped a damp palm on my cloak and forced a smile. I need to talk to your boss. Where can I find him? He finds you, not the other way around. Vivian pinched my side. See? It is the genie scenario. Thug number two frowned, the action pulling taut, a scar beseeching his cheek. Genie scenario? Never mind. I need to speak with Argus now. I have the information he's looking for. He won't be happy when he finds out you're standing in the way. He might even chop off your fingers, bleach the bones, and use them as writing instruments. Vivian, please. She cocked her head. What? Too much? Thug number one hooked his thumb into his belt and rocked back on his heels. The mountain quaked as a the mountain quaked as a laugh rumbled through his chest. All right, let's go. I wouldn't want to lose my fingers. Besides, I think the boss will like this one. Might even give me a raise. He winked at Vivian, and she narrowed her eyes in disgust. It took us almost an hour to reach our destination. The streets were congested, and we took every connecting alley available. Evening set in, darkening the skies and giving way to the blistering chill. The two thugs led us around the side of a tavern and held open the back door. A pungent tide of cooked meat and stale beer hit me in the face, causing my stomach to roll. Our shoes stuck to the dirty floor, making a suction sound. Oh, I hate that. That really bothers me. Making a suction sound as we traveled through the kitchen and past the door that led to the main part of the tavern. Yeah, that visual is not good for me. A lot of you, if you've been following me for a long time, you know I'm a germaphobe. But if you're new, then I'm a germaphobe. So that thought just made my stomach turn. Thug number one sauntered down the narrow hallway, barely the width of the massive shoulders. He rapped twice on the wooden door, and a panel slid open to reveal a pair of deep-set eyes. Is the boss in? I've got the witch and her friend insisting to see him. The panel slammed shut, and we stood awkwardly in the compact corridor. Vivian hooked her arm around mine, her lips tight. Some of her bravado had slipped now that we were in closed doors lengths away from seeing Argus in the flesh. No turning back now. My nerves raced, and a thin river of trepidation followed through my veins. I was empty-handed except for the slip of paper that contained Jane's seal. "Let me do the talking," I whispered, squeezing Vivian's arm. She nodded. "Fine by me, but Argus doesn't scare me." The door swung open, and we were ushered along another hallway, tighter than the last. Then, after pushing us inside Argus's lair, Thug number one slammed the door behind us. His boots echoed as they faded down the hallway. I squinted to see in the dim light. There were no windows, and the lanterns were turned low. We were met with a wave of heat from the fire crackling in the hearth. "Did you bring my money, witch?" The voice seemed disembodied, and I spun, trying to locate the sound. Argus leaned against the edge of the giant cabinet filled with crystal decanters. He lifted his glass to his lips, and ice clinked. "I have until the end of the month. So, this is a social visit." What a surprise. If I'd known, I would have laid out snacks. "I guess we'll have to make do with bourbon." He swallowed a deep gulp of the amber liquid, then stalked closer, offering a second glass to Vivian. Challenge lurked in his eyes. She eyed him wearily before accepting the drink. Argus cricked his lips to watch her down it, wiping a lingering drop from the corner of her mouth with a thumb. Vivian swallowed. "Argus Ward." He held out a hand. The witch is terrible at introductions. "Vivian James." She didn't return his handshake, and he closed his fingers with a stony expression. "You know, your friend doesn't think too much of me. What about you? First impressions?" Vivian worried her bottom lip. Argus' green gaze dipped to the spot. His knuckles tightened against the glass. She focused her eyes over his shoulder for a long moment, then returned to his steady stare. "I think you're a haunted man." His arrogance slipped, and an odd look flashed across his face. When he spoke, there was a gruffiness in his voice. When he spoke, there was a gruffness in his voice. "Maybe I am. What should I do about it?" Vivian glanced over his shoulder a second time and angled her head as if she were communicating with an invisible force. She leaned closer, and Argus went still. "My consultations aren't free." His bark of laughter broke the tension, and I exulted in relief. Tipping his glass at Vivian, Argus rounded a large mahogany desk and settled into the high-backed chair, where he rested his chin on his hand and gestured to the seats in front of him. "Ladies, please, where are my manners?" "First time I've seen any," I muttered, arranging my skirt to take a seat. Vivian did the same, then reached behind her neck and pulled her long, glossy hair over her shoulder. Argus watched, transfixed. I think he likes her. I think she kind of likes him too. That's my guess, though. I'm just guessing right now. When I snapped my fingers to regain his attention, he reluctantly obeyed. "If you aren't here to deliver my money, then I suspect it's because you have information on Ironhazel. Does Detective Do It All know you're here? Have you told him about us?" I ground my teeth together, forcing my irritation down to a manageable level. "I'm here because I need answers, and you're going to give them to me." He arched a brow. "I'm certainly interested to see you try." Reaching into my pocket, I removed the slip of paper that contained Argus's seal and slid it across the desk. I tapped the ink mark. "Do you recognize this?" "Of course. You have one with your name on it. In fact, lots of people have them. I'm a busy man. What's your point?" "My point is, this belonged to Jane Porter, a barmaid murdered in an alley 6 months ago." Argus flinched. It was subtle, but it gave him away. He he steepled his way Sorry, he steepled his fingers under his skin. Exactly what are you accusing me of, witch? Nothing yet, but I want to know why Jane owed you money and why you're interested in Iron Hazel. Unless you'd rather I hand this paper over to the royal authorities, they might jump to conclusions and, you know, think you have a motive for murder. That could be a bad for business. Argus plucked the piece of paper from under my fingers and held it over the candle flame, high enough that it wouldn't burn. Too slow. His gaze flicked to Vivian. He hesitated before schooling his features, then lowered the paper into the flame. It caught fire and blackened to ash. Dipping into my pocket, I pulled out another square with the same seal and Jane's handwritten name. Vivian tossed up her hands and pulled a copy from her pocket as well, waving it in the air. Argus bared his teeth in a harsh smile. Nice trick, witch. We can go all night. You probably find a copy or two in your henchman's pockets, possibly a few in the pockets of people we passed on our way here. Who knows? I like to leave breadcrumbs. But will you find the real one? I turned to Vivian and she shook her head. Yeah, probably not. Let's skip to the part where you cooperate and tell me what I want to know. We're busy, ladies. We're busy ladies, so get to the point. Argus stood and refilled his glass. He sipped the bourbon slowly, accompanied by the snap and crack of the fire in the hearth. Finally, he rubbed his hand over his brow and walked towards the shelving unit, from which he retrieved a ledger and returned to his seat. Just because I'm answering your questions doesn't mean we're becoming friendly. You still owe me every bloody coin of your agreement. I nodded, excitement humming through my body. My spell had worked. We had the upper hand for now. Argus opened the ledger and found the section on Jane. You're right, Jane did owe me money, but she was also working for me to pay off her debts. She worked for you? I thought she served drinks at at the Laughing Raven. Who do you think owns the Raven? He turned to Vivian and winked. I own quite a few establishments. She rolled her eyes. Will murderers never cease? I'm a businessman, love. Take note. He leaned back in his chair. Jane was ambitious. She wanted more out of life than slinging ale. She fell on hard times, and I offered her a solution. Men talk when they're drunk, especially to beautiful women. This is very true. Vivian grunted, making Argus's smile widen. I don't make the rules, and Jane didn't mind. She spied on them and reported back. She was good at her job, maybe too good. I was having a problem with someone who thought they could sell illegal substances in my territory and not pay for the right. I wanted a name, and Jane went after it. She ended up dead in an alley for her troubles. So, the person selling in your territory was Iron Hazel? I didn't know that at the time. Jane was killed before she gave me a name, and then, after her death, the seller vanished. Jane's room was trashed. Her things were taken and burned before I got there. All I found was the charred note and with the letters Iron H written on it. I didn't know what it meant. Wasn't even sure it was related to her murder until one of my men reported back about a visit to Flamelock Den. I had a talk with your friend Charlie, and he revealed what he told you. Then it's possible Iron Hazel was the one who killed Jade, I asked. That's what I want to find out. It may surprise you, but I don't like it when bad things happen to my people. Someone has to pay for Jane's death. The authorities don't care about a barmaid murdered in an alley, but I do. That's not true. It's important to me, too. I paused, debating whether to ask my next question. Hmm. Is there any way Jane might have crossed paths with Prince Marcus? Argus chuckled. In this part of town? No way. She was seen with a young man before her death, but it wasn't the prince. I can promise you that. Who was the young man? Vivian asked. Argus shrugged. Not sure. Maybe family or a friend. They appeared fairly close, but she didn't mention him to me, and no one claimed her body after she was found. I paid for her burial expenses through an anonymous donation. Derek said Jane didn't have any family. We all come from somewhere. Maybe Jane had a reason for staying away from hers. I know I do. Argus swirled the bourbon in his glass, and his eyes darkened. A loud crash erupted through the tavern, and footsteps raced down the hall. One of Argus's men pounded on the door. Boss, get out now. There's a raid. We'll hold him off. I pushed out of my chair, sending Vivian a panicked look. She scrambled to her feet, and we watched Argus stuff a handful of papers into a bag and pull open his desk drawer. He rifled through its contents, placing more items into the bag, then slung it over his shoulders. He was deadly calm, even as shouts from the authorities grew louder. They'd reached the first door. Terror seized me. If we were caught, we'd be hauled off to prison. But it wasn't the dark, rat-infested cell that made my legs buckle. It was knowing Derek would find me there before I could tell him the truth. I mean, you put yourself in that situation. I'm sorry, guys. Oh, I tell you, she gets in these troubles. What do we do? I hissed, searching. Oh, now you want to know what to do. 'Cause they were trying to tell you earlier what to do. But you didn't want to hear it. I'm sorry. Let's get back. What do we do? I hissed, searching for something to block the door. Quick, help me with the cabinet. Argus scowled. Don't touch my bourbon, witch. He slid a panel in the wall, revealing a dark passage, and waved us forward. Come on, let's go. Vivian reacted first, rushing to his side. He looped an arm around her waist. That's right, love. Watch your step. She shook off his arm and dove into the passage. Argus laughed. She'll come around. Witch, don't forget to close the panel. I started to follow, but remembered the ledger with Jane's information sitting on the desk. I had to take it with me. Oh my gosh, this girl. A boot slammed into the front door, and I rounded the desk, snatching the ledger, then ran for the passage just as the door splintered open. I shrieked, covering my face from flying debris. You! There! Stop! A man shouted. It was too late. I slid the panel back into place. At least they wouldn't arrest Vivian. Numbness washed over me as the authorities streamed into the office. They shouted for me to raise my hands. Then one of them ripped my arms behind my back and strung a pair of iron cuffs around my wrists. An officer picked up the ledger I'd gone back for, but I lost sight of him, pushed from behind by rough sets of hands. I'm sorry, hold on, I need to drink something. That's better. They loaded us into a wagon closed by bars, and I spotted thug number one and two sitting in the back. They inclined their heads when they saw me and shoved the man next to them to make room. The carriage rolled forward, and we were herded away into the night. I waited in the holding cell for an hour, then two. What was taking so long? Everyone else had been transported further into the prison already. Fear rooted my Fear rooted me to my chair. Part of me wanted the holding cell door to remain closed, to keep me locked away from the consequences of my actions. I squeezed my eyes shut, fighting against the panic. Going to see Argus was the right thing to do. I clung to that thought, desperate for it to soothe my frayed nerves. Derek would understand when I explained why I went there. He'd listen. He always listened, even when I made his life difficult. Footsteps thudded down the hall and came to a stop behind the cell door. My breath stalled in the back of my throat as the knob turned and the hinges whined. Derek stood in the threshold. Shit. Derek stood in the threshold, his fingers clamped around his thick boulder. I couldn't breathe at the look in his eyes. It was dark, thundercloud of a look that sucked all of the air from the room. I'd witnessed disappointment numerous times, but this was something else. This was devastation. Yep. Oh. His gaze pinned me to the seat. I was drowning in it, choking on his raw anguish. I sucked in an aching breath. I'm sorry, save it. Oh, shit. Derek strode toward the table, and the folder landed with a smack against the hard surface. Oh, he's mad, mad. No, he's just a little mad. The fear inside my heart expanded, turning my insides to ice. He wasn't going to listen. He stood, chest rising and falling with an uneven breath, his eyes drinking me in. Yeah, he's a little mad. For a fleeting second, they were filled with a mixture of relief and longing so powerful it made my stomach clench. Then it disappeared. Miss Daniels. Ooh, he called her Miss Daniels. My name cracked like a whip. Start by explaining how long you've been working for a known criminal, and finish by giving me a single reason why I shouldn't throw you in the hole with the rest of them. Yeah, he's a little mad. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are concluding. Thank you so much for watching. Um, we'll be doing the next chapters in the next couple of days. If you're interested, watch my other videos that are coming out. I'm doing a lot of stuff on 2024 for astrology and tarot and some mediumship. Thank you again. We'll get back to see what trouble she's in because he's mad. It sounds like he's really mad. All right, see you later. Bye.